FPS and performance in Season 4 Reloaded is pretty rough at the moment, so I thought I'd bring you guys an updated settings video covering all of the in-game stuff, all of your Windows settings, all of the config files you need to update to make sure we're achieving the maximum balance of FPS and visibility in Warzone 2. Starting off with the in-game settings in the display area, display mode needs to be full screen exclusive. Full screen borderless, yep, it's nice being able to Alt-Tab a bit quicker. I know that's why a lot of people choose to use that, but quite honestly, full screen exclusive just gives you lower input lag, better FPS overall, and if you're someone who cares about having a competitive edge in game, you need to be using this option instead of borderless. Display monitor and display adapter should be set to your monitor and GPU of choice. Screen refresh rate, ensure that this is at its highest setting, which should match with your monitor's refresh rate. I'm running a 240Hz monitor. It reads it as 239.97, but you're just looking to put it at whatever one is nearest. Display resolution, you can leave this at automatic. It should select the native resolution. Dynamic resolution, keep this off. If you have this on, it's going to start changing your resolution on the fly to try and help out FPS. There's just better ways to gain FPS later on in this video, so leave it off. Aspect ratio, we're going to leave this at automatic, and then VSync gameplay and menus, make sure both of these are off. Yes, it helps with screen tearing, which can look a bit bad, but it introduces a ton of input lag that basically makes the game unplayable. Next up is my custom frame rate limit. A lot of people are still running this at unlimited, overworking their system. Instead, put it at custom, then come down to show more. Gameplay custom frame rate limit, I've toyed with putting this at sort of just above my refresh rate or just above the FPS I hit, but the FPS fluctuations in this game are so wild that I find the best option here is to just max this all the way out so that you are always achieving the maximum FPS you can in game. Then menu custom frame rate limit, I put this down at 120. This means that when I'm just sitting here like recording this video or I'm just playing around with classes and stuff, I don't need crazy FPS. I'm just making classes. I'm just selecting a game mode, and it keeps my system in a bit more of an idle state. And then lastly, the out of focus frame rate limit. If I'm alt-tabbing out of my game to do something, I don't want my PC lagging because the game's still running at 300 FPS in the background. Instead, you can bring this down to 30, and then when you tab back in, you're going to be going back up to 120 or, you know, whatever your unlimited frame rate limit is in game. So yeah, this is a really important one, especially if you like multitasking. This restart shaders optimization option is actually really helpful if you're having loads of weird bugs in game and lag that you can't seem to solve. Out of nowhere, it can be you've got some corrupt shaders in some way. You can just come in here, click restart shaders optimization, and it will kick everything into gear, and it should make things run a little bit smoother. So just remember where that is for the future. Then shader optimization, this just sort of gives a bit of a blurb on what shader optimization is. It's nothing to do with any settings. Display gamma, you're going to put this to 2.2 if you're playing on a monitor like I am, a PC monitor, and if you're on a TV, you put it to 2.4. Then brightness, I always recommend bringing this up from the default of 50 to about 55. It just brightens up some of those corners, makes things a little bit easier to see, improves your visibility overall. Then we come on down to high dynamic range. Make sure this is off. Even if you are running a HDR compatible monitor, it's not something we want to be using in competitive games. It's great for single player games. It's great to add some atmosphere to the story of the campaign. But when you're in Warzone and you're just trying to win, this will not help you out at all. It will not help with your visibility, so keep it off. Moving on to the quality tab, the quality presets, it doesn't matter what we set here because as soon as we start playing with everything below, it's going to become custom, so just leave this at whatever it is. Then render resolution. I'd recommend starting off at the beginning of this process with this set to 100 or 100%. That way it is matching up with my native resolution. I'm not downscaling, I'm not upscaling. If after we've done everything here, you are still struggling, you can come here and maybe turn this down to 90, 90% render resolution, maybe 80, but I wouldn't go really any lower than that. You're going to start having a pretty blurry game at that point. But for most people, stick with 100. Upscaling and sharpening options. There's a ton of options in here that a lot of people don't understand. I have a whole video covering the effects of all these and some of my recommendations for a lot of different scenarios. But long story short, everything from the top Intel Zest down to AMD FSR 2.1 are upscalers, which should help with your FPS, but they do make the game look a little bit blurrier than normal native resolution. I'd recommend most people just use this sharpening option, Fidelity FX CAS, and then go to show more and put the CAS strength to around 75. That's a bit of personal preference. Essentially what this is all doing is it's going to sharpen up your game. It's just going to make things look a little bit less blurry, a little bit less smeared over your screen, and really sharpen up those visuals. A really important setting, something which I used to not recommend you run because it did limit your FPS a little bit, but I think they've improved overall how it's implemented, and it's a no-brainer now to just be running FX CAS. Moving on to anti-aliasing, SMAAT2X versus the filmic option. There are advantages to both here, and it is a bit of personal preference. Essentially, if you just want maximum FPS, the SMAA option is your best bet. The problem with this option, though, is that it does add this grainy texture. You might be able to spot it here. This sort of dotted black texture all over the van here, and it will also appear on a load of walls in game as well. It's very strange. You can fix that by putting on the filmic option, but you will lose, 2% or so of FPS. It's a bit of personal preference. Currently, for maximum performance, I'm dealing with that graininess and running the normal option, but I would recommend that you try both out and see what works for you. For the anti-aliasing quality, you then want to set this to normal. This is going to be a common reasoning that I use for a couple of the other settings throughout this video, but basically the difference between low and normal visually and in terms of visibility is pretty drastic. But the change in FPS, the FPS you lose going from low to normal is very little. So it's in most circumstances worth running normal over the lowest of low. Okay, video memory scale. This one annoys me because I still see other people recommending that players run this at 90. They're saying it will give you the most FPS because it dedicates more VRAM to Warzone. That is not how this works. If you are running an up-to-date, decently new GPU, you can start bringing this down all the way to 50. That's what I run it at. It gives me the lowest amount of hitching and stuttering. It even says over here, when experiencing hitches, consider closing other unused applications or lowering this settings target. That is what's going to help for most people on modern PCs. My recommendation here is start at 50, play a bit, and start raising it up, and see which of the 5 options, 50, 60, 70, 80, or 90, works best for you. It's hard for me to just recommend a single option. It's completely dependent on your GPU and your entire system, okay? Case closed. Okay, texture resolution. This is similar to the anti-aliasing quality from before. The lowest option moving up to the second lowest option just looks a load better. It makes your textures look far more realistic and far more detailed and gives you far more of that nice visibility and visuals in game. And you don't lose much FPS at all just by bumping this from very low to low. So yeah, put this at low. Then texture filter anisotropic. Just max this all the way out. It makes your textures at those non head-on angles, like you can see with this road over here where we're looking at it slightly from an angle. It makes those look way better, and it has little to no impact on FPS at all. It never does. Anisotropic filtering is not a heavy thing to run in any game, so I pretty much always recommend that you run it on its max. Then nearby level of detail and distant level of detail. Put these both to low. Don't know why they've reordered them between the two settings. That's just a classic COD thing to do, I guess, but make sure these are on low. It's not going to affect anything, really. It's going to maybe make a little more pop-in happen at distance, but it will actually help your FPS out a decent amount, I have found. Then cluttered raw distance. You'll see this is actually blank. I'm going to explain that a bit later on. Essentially, there's a short and a long option here, but through a config file, I'm going to make it lower than the short option, giving us a really nice FPS boost, but the menu doesn't know how to handle it, so it just gives you a blank box. Then particle quality. Put this to low. This pretty much exclusively affects how explosions and flares and things like this over here look. It does make them look considerably worse, but this is quite a big FPS hog, as well as particle quality level, which I'd recommend you put on the lowest option as well. It just gives a nice FPS boost, and we don't care too much about how those things look because they're only there for a couple of seconds and then they're gone anyway. So make sure you've lowered them down to their lowest settings. Then bullet impacts. This is personal preference, has no effect on FPS or visuals. I like to leave them on because Bullet impacts are cool. Persistent damage layers, we do want to turn these off. This has a little bit of effect on performance. You can see it has a medium effect on VRAM, but this is more to do with when explosions go off, will it leave some sort of a texture, like a dark texture where the explosions happened or up against the wall. I find that this also can affect visuals a little bit. It makes sort of your overall visibility a bit worse when there's extra textures being added in the middle of fights. So yeah, I'd recommend you keep this one off. Shader quality, put this on low. There are still some people thinking that you need to run this above low if you want to make your camos look good. It's not the case anymore. They fixed that right after the game came out. So you can run this on low and your gold camo that you grinded for will still look very nice. And also, this is a massive FPS hog. So yeah, this is a big one you need to turn down. Tessellation, turn this off. It's a visual effect that can make textures look, I guess, a bit more bumpy. I think how textures look with texture resolution low and texture anisotropic being high is good enough, and we can just leave tessellation off just to improve our performance. It doesn't really help with visibility either. So yeah, definitely recommend off here. Then on-demand texture streaming, we're going to put this to off. If you had this on, it would start downloading these really high quality textures while you're playing. So you've got your internet being taxed. You've also got your hard drive being taxed because you're downloading up to 24 gigabytes of textures. It's completely unnecessary. Please do not turn this on. If you do find these optimizations and settings that I provide for you guys to be useful, then the best thanks you can give me is to head down below, click the like button on the video, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I'm pushing for that 100,000 mark. You know, I want that plaque up on the wall, and it only takes a couple of clicks. So if you haven't done it already, go down and do it now. Streaming quality, I've got this set to low here, but I'd recommend you put this on normal. The reason being is that it's essentially a free boost to your textures, especially at range in terms of how they look and the visibility that you can get. And when I say free, I mean that you're not losing any performance, even though it says over here, effect on VRAM medium and GPU medium. If you haven't learned it already, these things over here don't really mean much in terms of the actual effect. So yeah, put this on normal and get some nicer looking textures. However, volumetric quality, this is a big no-no. Volumetric quality is going to determine how realistic light and fog looks and clouds and dust particles and stuff. No, you keep this on low. This is a real FPS hog if you've got this turned up. It's great for campaign and immersiveness, but not good for the competitive side of Warzone. Keep that on low. Deferred physics quality and water quality, these both affect how water looks, and water can be a big performance hog in Warzone 2. There's a lot more water, especially on Vondel, where you've got all the canals going around. So put this on off, put this on default, and that's going to give you overall the best performance in game. Before we carry on with the settings, this video is kindly sponsored by a really awesome game that I've been having a lot of fun with recently, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most in-depth, fully featured vehicle combat game you can play right now. You'll get access to over 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships to take control of in dynamic PvP battles. Every single one of those vehicles is incredibly detailed right down to the individual components, which only adds to the immersion this game offers in combat. These vehicles span over 100 years of development from the 1920s to the modern day. The game's available on PC, Xbox Series S and X, PS5, and previous gen consoles. And whether you're looking for fast-paced action or more realistic tactical gameplay, War Thunder offers PvP at various immersion levels, so you can pick and choose. I actually love some of the crazy interactions you get between air, land, and naval vehicles, some of the weird scenarios you get into. Things get pretty nuts. Head down below to the description for a link to download and play War Thunder right now. My link gives you a large free bonus pack containing multiple premium vehicles, premium account boosters, and much more. Shadow map resolution is going to be similar to the textures and the anti-aliasing, where very low looks really bad, low looks considerably better for very little FPS loss, so put it on low. Screen space shadows, just unnecessary. This is all to do with shadows on, for example, your gun when you're moving around and things like that. It's just unnecessary. It's not going to affect your shadows around you in game, so just turn them off. Spot shadow quality, put these on low. These are another bit of an FPS hog. They are to do with lighting effects in game. Not important, so keep them on low. And then spot cache, a lot of people will read the effect on VRAM over here as high in red. You know, that's bad. Put it on low, otherwise you're going to lose FPS. Actually, not the case. This has very little effect on FPS at all from any testing I've done. It basically affects how much you're going to stutter in game. Turning this down to low really can make you stutter a lot in situations. So if you found yourself stuttering, it's actually because you need to put this on high. This gives the size of the spot cache enough size to store all of these spotlight shadows, which are being generated in game. Every time you have to regenerate any of this kind of stuff, like shaders, you get those little lag spikes and stuff. So putting this on ultra pretty much eliminates all of that. Then particle lighting. Put this on low. Not very much to explain on this. It's just unnecessary and causes more of an FPS loss than we would like. Ambient occlusion, we're going to put this to off. This will limit some of those shadows in those dark corners. You can literally see here in the option on the right, there is actually a corner which would be much harder to see, especially the new Black Noir skin. That could hide in that corner. By turning off ambient occlusion, we limit the hiding spaces for the Rose 3.0 skins, okay? Then, screen space reflections, we're going to put them on off. Static reflection quality, we're going to put them low. And weather grid volumes, we're going to turn off. Then at the bottom of this section, depth of field, world motion blur, and weapon motion blur. We hate all that kind of stuff. Turn it all off. It's all visual noise that will not help you in game, as well as film grain, which we're going to put to 0. And the last bit of the graphics in game, field of view, I put this still at 120. You might find a bit more success putting it at maybe 110. It might make it so that enemies appear a little bit bigger on your screen because you're not so zoomed out, but I would always recommend that you get used to playing 120 FOV so you get the maximum amount of information possible in game. Then ADS field of view, make sure this is on affected so that when you ADS in, as you can see on the right here, this is affected, this is independent. Affected will give you, once again, much more of a wide cone of field of view so you can continue to pull in as much information as possible. Obviously very important in Warzone where you could have people all around you potentially dropping in and killing you. So weapon field of view, this is a bit of a personal preference thing. I like it on wide. I find that it's because it makes the weapon look smaller on my screen. It just takes up a bit less screen space and it's not so in my face. But I know some people like narrow, so try all of these out and see which one works best for you. Third person field of view, we don't seem to actually ever have third person in the game anyway. I would probably just max this out for if you were going to play third person whenever it's around, but it doesn't seem to matter very much because it's barely ever there. Field of view for vehicles, I would put this to wide so that we can see as much as possible in vehicles as well. So the general mantra here is see as much as possible. Then lastly, we've got the camera movements for first and third person. Put these to least to just reduce that camera shake, reduce that visual noise. Third person ADS transition, I don't really care. And then default spectator camera. I like to put this as game perspective. The helmet camera thing, whilst it's kind of immersive, if I want to spectate a squad mate of mine and help them out, I need to be looking in their game perspective in first person because that's what's actually going to help. I'll cover audio pretty briefly as well here. I like to use PC as my audio mix. It says it gives the tightest dynamic range. Essentially, that means that the loud sounds get a little bit less loud and the quiet sounds get made more loud. That's the really important thing, so I can hear footsteps a lot more. I know there's a lot more complex audio buffs you can do that some people have figured out, but I stick to just the simple stuff. If you want to go do some audio tuning, there are people who can do that. People like Art is War. You can go find him on YouTube as well. He's really good with the audio stuff. So just for this video, I would recommend you start off with PC because it's going to help pretty much raise all those quiet sounds like footsteps a decent amount. Then in the different volumes, just some key things here. Make sure that you've got your effects all the way maxed out. That's the most important channel here. Dialogue, I like to still hear it a little bit, but I make it a bit quieter so it doesn't drown out the effects. Same with voice chat if I'm using voice chat at any time, which I don't tend to use it that much anyway. And then make sure you've got the music, both cinematic and gameplay, both off because they can get in the way of the overall soundstage. Last thing in here, it's hard for me to test because I'm playing on Battle.net, but I have heard that on Steam there have been some problems where if you are running your game voice channel on all lobbies so you can hear everyone in game, it's actually affecting FPS. So I tend to run this on friends only. I don't think it's a problem on Battle.net. So if you're on Battle.net, you can try out all lobby and maybe let me know down below. But I don't really play with all lobby on anyway because I don't want to hear everyone screaming down my ears. So friends only is how I like to run it. Next up, let's move on to the secret sauce, the config files. There's some really useful stuff in here that just raise that performance of the game up a tad bit more than we can get with just in-game settings. You're going to come to this folder, C drive, users, your username, documents, Call of Duty, players, and you're going to have all of these folders and files. The one we want to open up is options.3.codhq, and then you might not see the .cst bit if you don't have your file extensions on. Then you're going to open up a blank notepad editor and then just simply drag and drop that file onto there. If you've done it correctly, you should have the file open here for editing. Then do Control F to do a search, and we want to first of all search for async, all one word, async. Click next. You might not find anything here. If you don't, I'll explain that in just a second. But if you do, you'll probably find that it's by default set to true. You want to change that to false. In theory, what this should do, this setting, when you've got it set to true, is make your GPU and your CPU work better together. That's sort of what async compute's meant to be, but it's not working very well for many games, especially Warzone, and putting it to false, disabling it, helps out your FPS. Now, as I mentioned, you might not actually see this in your config file. It might just not be there. If it's not, don't worry, it's just because it's not a setting that's compatible with your setup. I've had a lot of comments on previous videos saying, I can't see async compute. Why is it not there? Should I add it? If it's not there, just leave it. Just don't worry about it. It's only a setting you need to worry about if it's in the file for you, okay? The next thing we need to search for is clutter. You need to search up, I believe, because we're at the bottom of the document here. That's where async compute is for me, but you can try up and down to find things. You can see it's just here after bullet impact. Clutter max dist. So this is the one which we looked at earlier where there was a short and a long setting in game. Essentially, when you put it to short, it doesn't reach the lowest setting that you can, in theory, put this at using the config file. The lowest setting you can put in here is actually 100. You see it's 100.60. So what I would recommend you do is copy that whole number, Control C, and then highlight anything that's in between the two inverted commas, the speech marks, and just paste that in. This does, however, make it so that little rocks and stuff that you see along the floor and grass sort of pop in as you run, which some people don't like. But me personally, it's not a distraction, and the FPS gains are pretty serious with this one. The last thing we want to search for is renderer. So renderer, we'll search down, and you should find renderer worker count. This is the thread count that's going to be used for the game. There's been a lot of debate on this, but the black and white answer is however many physical cores your CPU has is what number you should put in this area here. How do you find that? Simple. Do Control-Alt-Delete, go to Task Manager, go to Details, no, Performance, sorry, then CPU. Down here, you will see cores and logical processors. That's essentially your cores and your threads. For me, my cores is 8 on this Intel i7-12700K. So that's what I need to put in here. If you're running a quad core, you're going to put in 4. If you're running a hexa-core, you're going to put in 6. Just put in whatever matches your task manager and you should be good to go. This is overall going to give you more stable FPS in game, higher FPS as well, less stuttering, a really important setting to change. After all of this, make sure you save all the changes and close down that config file. Last couple of things in this video, a couple of important Windows settings. First one, search for game mode. You'll have game mode settings. Make sure that this is turned on. It optimizes your PC for play. This used to be a bit of a weird, buggy setting when they first introduced it, but right now, this has to be on for literally any game you play on PC, but I know a lot of people still have this off. It just makes things run in general better. This isn't just Warzone 2. I will recommend this for every single game, except for any which might have some weird problems with it. But Warzone's not one of them. And the last Windows setting we want to change is down here. We search for graphics settings, and it's called hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. Some people will shorthand this to HAGS. You need to make sure this is off, Bit weird, I know, because it says reduce latency and improve performance. Well, that's true for a lot of games, but Warzone 2 isn't one of them. Warzone 2 actually runs better with this turned off. So make sure this is off. You might have to restart your PC to make sure that's kicked in if you already had this on, but just restart your PC, restart Warzone 2, and you will find a pretty much free performance boost you've been given by turning hags off. It's pretty awesome. Guys, don't forget to head down to the description for a link to download and play War Thunder right now. For what is a free-to-play game, it is incredibly fun. There is a load on offer, loads of content. There's really no reason to not try it out. You'll be able to grab that free bonus pack with all of that premium goodness in it, and you'll definitely have a blast. The next step I'd recommend for all NVIDIA GPU users is to update your NVIDIA control panel settings, and I've got a video covering that over here. So go and watch that, and it will give you even more of a performance boost beyond everything we've covered today.